What's the first thought that comes to your mind when you hear the word death? When you hear the word afterlife? When you hear the phrase day of judgment? For most of us, we associate terms like these with things that are negative and things that are cryptic. Why do I want to talk about death? Why should I think about the graveyard? We think about skeletons and imagery that again is associated with things that are very dark. In reality, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala within the whole Quran, as well as the ahadith of the Prophet and his family, peace and blessings be upon them, don't speak about death in this cryptic way that many of us perceive. We see the transition from this world to the next as something natural, and for many of us, something positive. When someone passes away, we call them marhum or marhuma, someone who's enveloped and covered and embraced and encompassed in the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, coming from the root word rahima. At the end of the day, we have to recognize that undoubtedly we are going to make this transition and go through this journey between this world and the next. Darun ila dar, as the hadith states, from one world, from one home to another. So might as well understand what it's all about and understand at the same time how exactly to embrace it. But again, we fear it, and we fear engaging in a conversation around it because again of all of that bombardment of images that we have associating with terms like death, like afterlife, like the graveyard, like the day of judgment. My friend, it's important to recognize that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as we have been saying time and time again, He cares about us and He's concerned about us. And this step that we take between this world and the next is undoubtedly a transition that we have to make. In the same way that we transitioned from the womb of our mothers into this dunya. When we enter into this world, we adjust. And if anyone were to come to us today and say, hey, would you rather prefer to be in the womb of your mother and return back to where you were several decades ago? Or would you prefer to be in this world? Of course, when we have some difficult days, we'd say, no, I'd rather be back in the company of my mom. But generally speaking, the experiences that we have and the joys, in spite of the difficulties, are something cooling to the eye and they're pleasurable to the heart. We appreciate the fact that we've had this gift and privilege to being born into this world and experiencing everything that we've experienced. Similarly, my friends, when we transition from this world to the next, we'll adjust. And we're going to recognize that that world is far more vast and is filled with so many a blessing in ways that I could have never, ever otherwise perceived. We have to trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that same God who cared for us when we were insignificant in the womb of our mothers. That same God who brought us into this world and placed us in the tender care of those who cared for us and loved us in that very early stage of our lives. That same God who cared for us when we had no friends, when we had no wealth, when we had no relationships. That same God who listened to us in the darkness of night and our cries and our tears shed in His way, subhanahu wa ta'ala. We have this perception again that the moment that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala takes our soul and our community members place us into a grave and throw dust on our face, that at the end of the day, that's it. God doesn't care about us anymore. That God no longer has any concern for us. That's not the case. The same God who cared for us then will undoubtedly care for us at that moment. And He will undoubtedly care for us on that day when we are raised on the day of judgment. And He will undoubtedly have that same sense of compassion, as inshallah we will be admitted into paradise in the company of the Prophet and his family, alayhim salam. In that famous ritual that we perform around the deceased, what is known as a talqeen, we go toward the deceased before the family members and community members leave the graveyard after burying them. We recite the testimony of faith. We remind them that when the angels come to them, that they should speak to them comfortably and proudly. لا تخاف ولا تحزن. Don't be fearful and don't grieve when those angels come to you. Tell them that you believed in a God. Remind them that your prophet is Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Remind them and notify them that your Qibla was the Holy Kaaba and that your book was the Holy Quran. We say, لا تخاف ولا تحزن. Don't fear and don't grieve. The only thing that you're entering into is something unique and new, and that's why you fear it. But when we have faith, and when we have belief, and when we have conviction, but more than that, when we have the grace and the compassion and the love and the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala at that moment, there's nothing to fear. Because again, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala undoubtedly wants us to be successful, has created us for paradise, not for hell. And insha'Allah, by His grace and by His mercy, we will be in the highest rank of paradise in the company of the Prophet and his family. Peace and blessings be upon him.